I welcome all of you for this Manage International Conference on Agricultural Extension and Advisory Services, Innovation to Impact. On behalf of Manage and behalf of all the participants and Manage stakeholders, we welcome you for this international conference. This conference, the first of this conference earlier we thought 2020 February is supposed to be happen. But due to COVID, we were postponed and it is going online. Otherwise, we planned for the traditional and face-to-face international conference on agriculture extension and advisory services. And also these 6 themes, we thought something it will go like important themes, like it will be every year we want to conduct something like introducing innovations and reforming capabilities of agriculture institutions, and followed by beyond agricultural extension, what they are agriculture generally field crops and allied sector like livestock and fisheries, what are the important innovations are happening in agriculture extension. And now we talk about a lot of startups and the entrepreneurship activities in agriculture. No more it's a traditional way of living, or it is a business. That's why how it makes agriculture extension, how it is helping. And last 2 decades, many of the developing countries, we are talking about ICTs and how it makes the difference, what is the impact it is created. And again, today they talk about new extension, something like gender, nutrition, or urban agriculture, and how it makes like that. And these 3 topics, we thought of having an international conference with practitioners. It is not very regular academic conferences like it happens, and most of the today this conference for 3 days, almost 25 presenters they are presenting, starting from 2 keynotes, and there are 6 invited speakers and 20 of paper presenters. These all research-based paper presenters, and also there are most of them are practitioners. They are doing on the particular topic. And this annual event this year, due to COVID pandemic, we started in online. Otherwise, it will go for, it's a biennial event, and it is supposed to be 2020 onwards. It's a biennial event, and we'll have next event during 2023 on same topic. The topic may not change because it comprises of most of the broad areas of agriculture extension. It will be continuing. And after 2 years, again, 2023 in the same February, same dates, we will go for this conference. And as you know, Manage, you have seen, it's the organization started in 1987, and it is the maybe globally, if you talk about some organization for agricultural extension, very specifically, there may be large number of developmental departments, others might be doing for agriculture extension, doing research or developmental activities. But the institute, which is very much specialized and only for agriculture extension, maybe globally, we see only the Manage, National Institute of Agriculture Extension Management, and we are proud to host this program. And today's with us, there are 2 speakers. There are very renowned 2 speakers are with us, and keynote speakers are 2 of them are today. They are there, and today evening also there are invited speakers from Michigan State University, Professor Murari Suvedi. Today evening at 7 o'clock he will be with us. And first I will go for our introducing first keynote speaker, Dr. Kristin Davis. And Dr. Kristin Davis is a senior research fellow in the Development Strategy and Governance Division of the International Food Policy Research Institute, Washington, D.C. And she serves as the co-director of the Feed the Future Developing Local Extension Capacity Project, popularly called DELC, D-L-E-C, DELC project. And Kristin Davis, a US national, joined in International Food Policy Research Institute in November 2004 as a postdoctoral fellow. She has conducted research on farmer field schools, rural institutions, and agricultural innovation systems, pluralistic extension systems, and extension education in Africa and worldwide. And she has some 40 peer-reviewed journal articles, one of the high-rated journal articles, highly cited articles he is having, and large number of book chapters and policy briefs for your credit. She has served as a president of the Association for International Agricultural and Extension Education, popularly called as AIAE, and currently serves as the board of the AIE, and she is editor-in-chief of the Journal of Agricultural Education and Extension from Wageningen, Netherlands. And Davis was the architect of the new extension learning kit and a set of modules containing core competencies for the global extension agent. And also she was the leader in leading GFRS for almost 1 decade, and to put across the country, she put some 18 global and regional networks to work for the agriculture extension and also to professionalize and also to provide the advocacy for agriculture extension. There are a large number of regional networks and the country forums promoted by Dr. Kristin Davis. And on behalf of Manage, we welcome Dr. Kristin Davis from IFPRI for today's keynote speak. And we have another speaker. Today's another keynote speaker from FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. Dr. Selvaraju Ramasamy is head of the Research and Extension Unit and Office of the Innovation of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He leads the FAO's efforts in agriculture research and extension, strengthening of agriculture innovation systems, and outreach of innovative agriculture technologies and practices. His work also focused on partnership with international national agriculture research centers and forums of extension and advisory services. Dr. Selvaraju Ramasamy is with FAO more than almost it is 1.5 decades. Since 2007, he is with FAO. And on behalf of Manage and on behalf of all our participants, we welcome you, sir, Dr. Selvaraju Ramasamy. And for the keynote speakers, Madam, today we are having Dr. Kristin Davis and Dr. Selvaraju Ramasamy. We are having the participants from across the country and also other parts of the country. And they are mostly from practitioners. They are agricultural extension professionals, mostly from India, majority of them from India, very few from foreign countries, because we didn't put a registration link open for across because due to internet outages, other things, we restricted participation, and only yesterday we put it, a few members we want to join, because we are going for this entire proceedings, we are going to record, and we will be putting across for across, anybody can see in the YouTube link. We are recording the entire event, all the presentation. And most of them extension practitioners. There are scientists from Indian Council of Agriculture Research. There are practitioners and subject matter experts from the Krishi Vigyan Kendras and developmental departments like Department of Agriculture, Department of Fisheries, and across the country there are different developmental departments. Their professionals they are here. And I welcome all of you on behalf of Manage. And we hope today's keynote speech will be inspiring for all of us, and we will take a lot of take-home messages. And with this, I request Dr. Kristin Davis to start her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saravanan. Nice to be with you all today, and I'm honored to be one of the keynote share. Okay, here we go. I've got the slide now. So turbulence of last year has caused us to come back and take stock. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about the past, the present, and the future of agricultural extension and advisory services. Let me know if there are any technical problems. So we'll look at some of the past, a little bit of history of extension going quite far back, and look at some of the trends going on today, and then talk about some of the scenarios for the future of extension. So when we look at the past, we can go all the way back to around 1800 BC, actually, when we're talking about tablets of a different sort being used in Mesopotamia for agricultural advice. I think today we have a sort of a different tablet that is being used, but nevertheless, extension and advisory services have been around for a long time. If we go back in time to the 1800s AD, this is really the start of what they call modern extension in the British Islands, when universities like Oxford and Cambridge were trying to extend knowledge that they were gaining from research and education to nearby communities. And the US land grant system also took up this idea of extending knowledge and research to local communities. And that was the birth of modern extension. Still back in time, a lot of the post-colonial approaches were when the colonial governments withdrew, and the new governments, often with help of World Bank or other investors, started providing services to small-scale farmers, all crops and not just the cash crops. And the focus of these post-colonial approaches to extension was really on transfer of technology, modernization of agriculture, new techniques, new seeds, new inputs, and so forth. And they had strong links with research. In the 1980s or so, we had the famous, or should I say infamous, World Bank's training and visit system, which was a very structured and formalized approach to extension with regular visits, by extension, regular training of farmers and extension agents. This caused governments to put a lot of money and efforts into the civil service, and the extension services became very large, very top heavy, with a lot of funds going towards salaries and so forth. When the World Bank and IMF wanted to liberalize countries' governments and economies around the 1990s, they instituted these structural adjustment programs. And as a result, a lot of the funding was no longer available for operational funds. And all of the funding that was available had to go more towards salaries and stuff, leading to sort of, people not able to really implement programs well because they didn't have these operational funds. So this led to a lot of different reforms in extension, as well as the recognition that maybe TNV and some of the traditional extension wasn't working so well. So we had reforms like decentralization, privatization, market orientation, pluralism, and participatory approaches came in around this same time in the 1980s, 1990s, and into the 2000s. And I just wanted to document, I don't think it's been documented before very well, the evolution of extension knowledge hubs in the past. So around the time of training and the Neuchâtel initiative was started, and this involved the Swiss donor agency SDC coming and saying, let's think of some alternatives to training and visit. And they called together other donors that were investing in extension and advisory services. They met in Neuchâtel in 1995, and thereafter every year they would meet on an ad hoc basis with no formal structure to develop knowledge materials about how can we do extension better, how can we fund extension better. So the Neuchâtel initiative started reaching out more to the south and more toward non-donors to involve the African Forum for Agricultural Advisory Services, farmer organizations, and others. And around 2010, the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services, GFRAS, was born. And after that, Neuchâtel was given a nice burial and thanked for their work, and the GFRAS network was born. Around the same time, a lot of European chairs of extension were closing as people retired. They didn't continue to put new chairs in, and they closed those programs. And so I think today we really see the rise of extension research coming out of India and Africa. So looking more at the present, we've come from this very linear sort of approach, the transfer of technology approach, where research develops technologies or innovations, extension then passes them on to farmers, to the much more complex, messy, but I think realistic agricultural innovation systems approach, which really looks at how do actors interact to produce innovations. It also focuses on the fact that innovations don't just come from research. Innovations come from farmers, they come from extension, they come from the private sector, and they're not just technical innovations, but there's also innovations in processes and innovations in institutions. The other element to think about when we look at extension from an innovation systems framework or viewpoint is that the enabling environment, the rules of the game, the rules, the regulations really affect how innovation occurs and how these actors interact. So this is the viewpoint we have today, which has a lot of implications for what we see as extension and what capacities, extension, and advisory services need. So it's really beyond transfer of technology, beyond information delivery, to think about all the activities, all the actors that are providing information and services that farmers and other rural actors need with regard to technical, organizational, and management capacities to improve their livelihoods, their quality of life, and their well-being. And I just wanted to highlight a little bit this book, since we're talking about the present of extension or the status of extension today. There's a book that's just been put out. The link is in these slides. You can download it from the IFPRI website. If you like hard copies, you can also download it from Google or Amazon and pay for that. But basically, a few brief highlights from this book. We look at a global level of extension, what's happening today. We compare national systems to each other and regional systems. We do performance assessment of a number of extension services in 5 countries, and then we give lessons and policy insights. We use the best fit framework to analyze extension services in this book. So we look at the governance, which of course we have increasing pluralism, but public sector roles still remain, and public sector is still important. If you look at this example from Uganda, it's quite prevalent in the extension system there. We also find a real lack of policies worldwide to guide extension governance, and this is a problem. Capacity is a huge issue in extension organizations and for their staff. We have more than 1 million extension agents today, and really the line is starting to blur between what's formal extension, what's a farmer extensionist, what's a lead farmer, what's a village agent who's providing services in a private sector capacity, and so forth. But looking at this extension core today around the world, more than half of them only have a 2 to 3 year diploma or less in terms of their level of education. And in many countries, there's very little on-the-job training, continuing education for the extension staff. So capacities are very, very low. And I'm glad that we have Manage and institutes like that who are really working on capacities of extension agents. And then with regard to management of extension services, also an important component of extension services, we see that in many countries, extension agents carry a heavy workload. And the workload isn't always related to your typical agricultural advice and information. They often do things like providing or collecting credit, helping with national surveys and censuses and things like that. So they're not always doing agricultural work. And many countries have very limited or no incentive system. There's no career path, there's little rewards, there's no continuing education, as I already mentioned. And this is a factor that needs to be addressed if extension services are going to play a big role in the future. And then finally, looking at advisory methods, we often think of digital approaches today, and that's true, it's important. However, if we look across the world at extension approaches, traditional approaches are still important, your demonstrations, your group meetings. There's also an increasing focus on market-oriented approaches and linking farmers to market. But we'll be talking more about digital approaches in other speakers during this conference. So I'm not going to focus on that today. They're becoming more and more important. Several other trends are worth mentioning in extension today. There is a lot of crises going on, from COVID to climate change and pests and diseases to other risks. Digitalization, privatization, engagement of youth, and agripreneurship. So with regard to crises and emergencies, there's a lot more, it seems. Droughts, fires, hurricanes, tsunamis, the epidemics, even conflicts are affecting how people do agriculture and what extension can do as a result, and how extension can support people and communities during crises. So the question is, in spite of all these crises, how can we still reach Sustainable Development Goal number 2, zero hunger? How can we feed these hundreds of millions of hungry people? The GFROS annual meeting in 2019 in Jamaica addressed this, and I know that the Agricultural Extension South Asia Network, IASA, also has some blogs and other materials on extension and crises. So you can take a look at those links. And then digital extension or use of ICTs and extension. Obviously, these tools offer us a lot of opportunities for information distribution, for collecting information, helping to diagnose problems through taking pictures of diseases and so forth. There's many, many functions of ICTs for extension. So I list some of them here. The GFROS Global Good Practice Notes has a number of really useful materials on extension using ICTs. So you can take a look at that using this link. And then we have privatization as a trend today. So there's an increasing use of non-public providers, NGOs, private providers, whether they're individuals or companies. And a lot of this is due in part to cost recovery. People want to recover their costs and issues of sustainability. But it's also an issue of demand-driven extension. So private extension is more attuned to the demands of their customers by the nature of private extension provision. It also helps them to customize messages and advice to what farmers really want and need. The questions around privatization are who is left out? You know, maybe there's very poor farmers and producers who can't afford to pay for extension services and extension advice. And what about bias? If it's company that promotes a certain seed or pesticide, you know, maybe they're biased toward promoting those inputs to farmers. So those are questions around privatization. There's a 28-country study by Developing Local Extension Capacity, DLEC, which you can also look at to learn more about private sector extension provision. And then engagement. There's millions of unemployed youth worldwide, and a lot of programs and donors and country governments are thinking about how can we engage youth in agriculture to provide them with livelihood opportunities, to reduce poverty, to help stimulate economies. Some of the issues around this are that youth, number one, they lack assets to start businesses. They don't have credit. They don't have farmland per se. There's also an issue of cultural perceptions, or let's say misperceptions, that, you know, youth are not respected to give advice if they want to become a village extension agent or something. Youth themselves maybe don't want to go into agriculture. They want to do something different than what they perceive as, you know, an old-fashioned career that their grandparents or maybe their parents had. Some people think there's a lot of opportunities because of the digital tools we have these days. So youth are very adept at using digital tools, and maybe this is something that can entice them into agriculture if they're able to use digital technologies and make some money on the side. So the question here is, does extension have the right approach in engaging youth? There's also some DLEC studies on the youth, so you can look at the DLEC website and look at our youth studies that we've been doing. There's about 5 or 6 of them. And then bringing together the 2 previous ideas of privatization and also the youth can be really engaged in this idea of agripreneurship. And I know that Manoj has been doing a lot with this as well. So first of all, we can't provide formal jobs for all of these rural people, especially the young people who are coming into the job marketplace. So we need job creation. We need people who can employ themselves and create their own jobs. The question is, should extension serve agripreneurs and not just farmers? And if so, what skills or competencies would they need? So the recent DLEC report that we've just put out does really talk about this, and how can youth be involved in agripreneurship, either providing extension services or being recipients of extension services in an agripreneurial type of concept. The new Extensionist Learning Kit by GFROS, the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services, has a whole module about agripreneurship if you're wanting to gain some competencies there or learn more about agripreneurship. And then finally, looking to the future. So we've looked at the past, we've looked at the present of extension, and I want to look just a little bit into the future. So I think the common goal that have when we think about the future are the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, extension and advisory services are critical and key to Sustainable Development Goal number 1, no poverty, and number 2, zero hunger, as well as having links to many of the other ones as well. So this is our common goal when we're thinking about the future. Now, there's a very interesting article called Hey Siri, What's the Future of Extension?, where this Dr. King sort of looked at extension today and, why do we need extension if I can just say, hey Siri, how do I grow rice better? Or, Alexa, what do I do about the rats in my field? Do we need extension when we can just use our apps and digital technologies to get the information? So this is a big, important question today. And what's the relevance of extension in today's digital age? So when we look into our crystal ball for the future of extension, this is in part, based on the trends and where we're going, but I think also in part hopes and dreams of the future of extension. We see an extension that is capacitated, it's professional, it's digitally enabled, customized, and it's holistic. So let's take these one by one. When we think about extension, there's really 3 levels of capacity. There's your individual extension agent. She or he need all sorts of functional and technical capacities, but our organizations and our systems really need capacities too. We need capacities to build alliances, to partner, to problem solve, and so forth. So there's a lot of capacities that are needed for extension. And when we think about capacities, we have to think about it at these 3 different levels. I think an important element today for extension is really the issue of emotional intelligence. So the individual agent needs technical competencies, they need functional competencies, but they need this capacity to reason and to analyze emotional information. That's your self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-motivation. And if you look at Google and other companies like this, they really hire people based on their EQ rather than their IQ. And there's studies that show that what sets people apart, if you have high performers, it's this ability to reason and analyze emotional information, your emotional intelligence. And people are looking at this when they hire today. Organizational capacities, I mentioned some of these, but organizations of extension need to be able to adapt and respond. Just think about the COVID crisis the past year and how extension organizations adapted and responded, or maybe they didn't and they totally failed. We need to be able to adapt and respond to crises, to solve complex problems, to use critical thinking, and to partner. The second element is the professionalization of extension. So a lot of organizations, extension at the national level is putting in place and already have regulations for extension to make it more professional, certification systems, capacity development and continuing professional development, and workforce development. We have the Agricultural Skills Council of India that I know certifies at least these village level agents, if not also other types of extension agents. In Europe, we have a system called CHECRA, which certifies extension agents with regard to their professional competencies. Uganda and South Africa have also recently instituted regulations and a certification system where you have to register yourself and show what professionalization skills you have as an extension provider. And this is really important when we think about not just government hiring and firing extension workers, but all sorts of people coming up in NGOs and the private sector saying, I'm an advisor, I'm going to advise you about your crops, but these people need to have regulation and certification systems in place. And then we have digitally enabled extensions. So these are really about enhancing your work, accelerating your work. It's not about replacing people with machines. We still need people to provide the content, to explain the content to farmer, and to train and help farmers to use digital tools. So it's much more than information delivery. It's also about accessing finance and services, monitoring and evaluating services and staff, and it's about capacity building. We can use digital tools to strengthen capacities of extension. We really need digital extension and education today for these reasons listed here. The youth population that I mentioned, to reach more marginalized groups and people that are very far away. There's also an increasing tightening of budgets, less funds available to do our work as extension. Digital tools offer some scope for doing things at a cheaper cost. But we also have opportunities like big data, the increased use of cell phones and internet today, and the use of social media for information. In Myanmar, for instance, everyone goes to Facebook to get information and news and agricultural advice. And then we need, for the future extension, customized and smart advice for farmers. So these big data that are available help us to really take a look at the big picture and go all the way down to farmers' fields to see what might be needed in terms of inputs or what we should do in terms of the predicted weather. The digital tools offer a lot of opportunities for bundled services, using the big data, linking farmers to market, providing them with credit opportunities, and so forth. I think the questions here are really about, number one, issues of privacy, and then who owns the data? Companies are starting to collect information about all of us, but whose data should this be, and who makes the decisions based on these data? And then finally, the future extension needs to be one that's holistic. I think COVID-19 again has shown us that extension is about people and serving people's needs. So they have health needs, they have legal needs, they have gender-based needs, there's nutrition elements. Extension is much more than agricultural production. It's about linking farmers to market, it's about livestock and crops and natural resource management, and it's about human health and nutrition and many more things. And so extension agents obviously cannot be a master of all of these different competencies. However, extension agents need to be brokers and facilitators to link farmers to those experts to support their needs. So in conclusion, we've really come a long way since 1800 BC, when we're using clay tablets to provide extension advice. The present that we're in right now is very diverse and it's very fluid. There's a lot of change going on and we can't really see the future. But I think based on trends, based on what is going to happen in future from what we can see from the trends, is that there is a lot of hope for extension. There's a big role for an extension that is capacitated, is professional, digitally enabled, customized advice, and a holistic sort of approach to extension. So with that, I'd like you and put in a plug. The Developing Local Extension Capacity project will be ending in June. We're having our final annual community of practice online virtually the third week of April, so stay tuned for that. And we're also currently running a video competition for this community of practice. So if you want to put together a video about extension, please see the competition links here. So with that, I'll turn it back to our moderator, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Kristin, for your very insightful and that also putting from 1900s onwards, you are putting entire extension you brought up to today. That may be very great challenge within 30 minutes and putting since 1900s. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive and also very insightful session on agriculture extension. What was the past and what is the present now and what's supposed to be the future. And really it is very enriching. And we will take few questions, and there are questions there. The participants can type in the chat box. We will take questions one by one. Another 15 minutes are there for 18 minutes are there for Kristin, so you can answer those questions. And before that, as you clearly told today, the globally, if you see something like you told current trends like privatization and this one earlier also in Latin American countries, other countries, it was they tried, but even country like India, the real privatization, when we tell it, really not making it big way, because farmers, still small and marginal farmers, land holding farmers, they feel that it is the government's responsibility, and they supposed to give the public information. It's a public nature. They need to give the information as a welfare activity like that. That's why many of even our agripreneurs, they find it very difficult. How you see this trend in African countries or other countries, because he widely travels across the world, and many studies also conducted, especially in African continent. Any interesting examples on cost recovery or something farmers are paying for service like that, anything? So, yeah. One by one we'll take, because people have started putting the questions. We will go for one by one. That's why I thought, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think in African countries and a lot of other countries, there's this increasing pluralism. As mentioned in the chat, there's aggressive growth of private sector extension services. I think public extension services are still needed. And if you recall, I think Dr. Bert Swanson had produced a quadrant of different roles and services of extension. So there's, like you say, the welfare, there's public goods services that there's no interest for the private sector to provide. And so public sector needs to still produce and provide public goods services. Things like natural resource management is often considered a public good. And then there's also national development goals, reduction of poverty, reduction of food and nutrition insecurity. These are issues where the government would come in. And I see that the question in the chat is also talking about what's the future then of public extension when private extension is coming in. And I think the role of the public sector is changing. Public sector does need to retain some of those public goods services. But I think more and more the role of the public service is going to become the coordination and sort of regulation and oversight, making sure that the myriad of private providers are actually qualified, they're actually behaving in an ethical manner, and these are sorts of roles of the public system. And I see the public system also, providing those basic competencies and capacities. Of course, the private sector can do that as well, but they'll be doing it in their areas of interest. And so the public sector probably has to provide that baseline public competencies that are needed.
Yeah. Anyway, the chat box question also, I suppose you answered, and also he was wondering how the public extension feature, along with the efficiency, whether it will be delivering advisory service when compared to private extension, or also many they are using digital services. That may be his concern, whether really public sector is more efficient compared to private sector. But maybe roles may be clearly told, but roles may be really different. Many of the private sector might be going for something marketing or something aggressive they will go. But the public extension may be.
Right.
Yeah, anything you want to tell?
The efficiency question is a good one. And I think there's no real studies really looking at efficiency or comparing them, and it's quite difficult to compare apples and oranges. But I would say, the private sector tend to be more efficient, but more narrow as well. So the private sector is more efficient and more narrow, and the public sector is broader and probably less efficient. But this question of pluralism really brings big concerns with regard to duplication of efforts and coordination, because if everyone starts providing services, and in the country of Malawi, for instance, they have great concerns that, NGO A is saying do this and NGO B is saying no, do this, and the government is saying something else. And so quality of the messages is really a concern, as well as coordination and overlap. And so when we come into a pluralistic system, there really has to be some really good coordination to avoid the duplication and the overlap.
Yeah, another interesting point you raised when extension personnel need to be capacitated, or professional development, technical and functional competencies. And even our new extensionist, it is written by and a group of people led by you. It also very clearly articulates, along with the technical competencies, functional competencies are very important. Not only for extension, even European Commission clearly articulates for the even educational sector. Future of graduates should come more of something like functional competencies, not really the technical competency. But if India, country like India, we see over the years, we talk about only technology transfer, and then technology is more important, not the functional competencies. But today, Government of India tries to promote 10,000, 100,000 farmer producer organizations. But we see here, there is a leadership or something like leadership qualities are promoting or mobilizing the farmers, how they can work in the groups. These type of functional skills are needed. But whether our extension systems are able to offer, that is the big question mark. But still, there is not great support for functional skills compared to technical skills, unfortunately. And how we tackle it, like many of the developing countries, maybe extension personnel is facing same dilemma. There is a problem. Always people give importance for technical competencies, not for the functional competencies. Yeah, what we can do for this? Any idea on this? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Like that's a good point. And I think, yeah, this all stems probably from the Green Revolution and the positivist view that, technology is going to solve all of our problems. Which technology is important and technical skills are important, but as extension staff, we go beyond agronomy, we go beyond livestock, and we're working with people. So we need people skills. And in fact, I mean, sometimes I try to explain to people who don't know what extension is, and I say it's part agronomy, it's part sociology, it's part psychology, and there's many different elements, including education. So as you mentioned, the GFROS New Extensionist Learning Kit was developed to provide these functional competencies that are not included in the technical training. So technical training of extension staff has many limitations. So it's studies that we've looked at. There's almost no practical training. It's all textbook. It's very old-fashioned. They never get to drive a tractor or use an app or whatever. So even their technical training is not perfect. But certainly it's lacking those functional skills: communication, group development, leadership, gender issues, analysis, and so forth. And so the New Extensionist Learning Kit was developed to provide a set of materials to people that want to upskill their knowledge. These materials are free. You can download them, you can translate them, you can use them. So they're freely available. I understand that India has recently been reforming your extension curricula to, I hope, include more of these functional competencies. So it'll be interesting to see in future how this is going to affect, long-term outcomes and impacts of the communities that they're trying to reach.
Yeah. Another point across also, there is the same when you are studying many continents, and there is a problem of workload for extension personnel. Even we studied somewhere like 25 plus states we studied. It is not the real advisory or other work bothers them, but most of them continuously, daily, regularly reporting and other work. And also other interesting fact in ICTs, information communication technology, instead of facilitating their work, they will tell it WhatsApp groups makes a lot of stress, because always senior officials, they'll put the reports, and the orders will come from WhatsApp group. Then they need to force it to answer all the time. Even they won't get the quality personal life like that. There is a lot of dissatisfaction among the large number of extension professionals. And that is continuously happening, and there is no. And what we can do, because this ICTs, it is not really facilitating, they feel some of them. It is really forcing them to do continuously work, sending reports and WhatsApp groups, and they can't tell no anytime. That's the issue they are facing actually. That's what we can feel and what we can suggest for this. Anything?
Right. This is a very good point, and it's something not, it's not unique to extension. It's unique to any profession, really. But as you say, extension officers tend to have an overwhelmed workload in any case, because they say, oh, there's somebody in a rural area, let's use them to implement a project about nutrition or to collect census data or to do all sorts of things that's not part of their job description. So the first thing I think is really it's an issue of management. And we need to have a management system that suits today's technologies. And we need to think about, how to allow extension officers to switch off. So we need to manage their workload. We need to manage their time in a better way. And this is a job that needs to start at the highest levels of organizations. But secondly, we need something that is called digital wisdom. And I don't think it's really out there yet, but we need, and it's probably related to, emotional intelligence and critical thinking and all of this. But we need to empower and capacitate individuals to be able to make wise decisions, to be able to filter out information, to be able to filter out false news. There needs to be this capacity within individual extension agents to say, I'm going to turn off this WhatsApp group because it's not useful to me. Of course, you can't turn off your boss's WhatsApps, but those bosses need to be really thinking about, how are my staff using their time wisely, and what's the best way to communicate and get reports and so forth. That needs to be thought out a lot more.
Okay, there is another question, and a large number of countries still they go for the linear model, like you told, research, extension, and farmers. How to really make them go for the something systems approach, even though last 15 years the leaders are talking, even GFRS talks in big way, agriculture innovation systems. How we can make it? There is another question, this one, somewhere.
Right, I've seen that question, and it's a big issue, because I think what a lot of people have done, they've just done a cut and paste. So when they're talking about a project or they're talking about work as extension, they just say agricultural innovation systems instead of transfer of technology. But their mindset hasn't changed, that just their language has changed. I think it's going to take a lot of time and effort. And Dr. Rashid Suleiman and myself, worked on this position paper called The New Extensionist, which then led to the New Extensionist Learning Kit. But it's really thinking about extension in its different roles and the entirety of its roles in a different way. But it's very, very difficult to get policymakers and research programs to really think about the entire agricultural innovation system. Much simpler to think in a linear fashion, and it's much simpler to think from research inputs to outputs to your final target group, but it's not really realistic. I think it's going to take a lot of capacity building and continued dialogue with all these levels. It has to really start probably from your ministers and high-level decision makers to get them to think differently before it filters down to the rest of us.
Yeah, thank you, Kristin. Another interesting question. We'll talk agricultural extension over the years, but recent past, you see GFRS and many they will call agricultural extension and advisory services. There is a question, if you call it agricultural extension or extension, it is not mean advisory. Why we are putting two like that? There is another question. You'd like to answer?
Right. Yeah, this relates probably to that slide where I talked about Neuchâtel Initiative and GFRS, and even the earlier slide when I talked about the university-based extension. So those universities were extending knowledge. When we started GFRS, we had a big discussion about what are we calling ourselves and what are we talking about. And we landed on rural advisory services, but it's limiting. Most of the world outside of Europe uses extension. The US uses extension. Most African countries, maybe Anglophone at least, use extension. Asia uses extension. India uses extension. So toward the end of my tenure at GFRS, we started saying extension and advisory services. The reason we chose advisory services for GFRS was it's more inclusive. Extension means I'm the expert extending knowledge to poor farmers or to poor rural people, whereas advisory services, it's more participatory. You're advising one expert to another. The farmer's an expert in her own right or his own right. So that's the reason people like to keep advisory services, and it's much more focused on, dialogue and that sort of thing. And yeah, it's difficult because now we've lengthened the name and people say extension and advisory services, or agricultural extension and rural advisory services. But if you just recognize how these names came about, and then often in papers I myself say, this is what it means. That's why I gave you the slide saying what we mean when we say extension and advisory services. But then hereafter, I'm just going to use a short term like extension or an acronym like RA or something. for rural advisory services.
Okay, thank you, Kristin. Another interesting question from Dr. Mr. Disanaike. And these COVID times and the training normally happens in the physical mode now. Many of them, they are going COVID time, blessing in disguise. Many of them putting in online, a lot of streaming and all happening. Trainings also, they are replaced with online trainings. Whether what you think these online trainings can play a substantial role in future related to pandemics or regular programs also. What is the take? People are trying to adopt more and more online. Whether really it substitutes for the traditional way of doing training, or it is we need to have the complementary, how it is. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the objective and the audience, the topic. You know, you have to, the form has to follow, the function has to, the form has to suit the function, right? So if you're teaching something really complex and you need to do something in the ground or in a field, you know, obviously face-to-face is better. I think COVID-19 has forced us to go into greater digital literacy, the extension officers, the farmers, and everybody, and to recognize we don't always have to meet face-to-face. We can do a lot of learning, we can do a lot of interaction online, and I think it's really going to change for the future in terms of, you know, meetings and so forth. But at the same time, face-to-face is really important. It's important to have that human interaction. It's important to have, you know, the tea breaks and the coffee breaks and the field trips, which you cannot do in a virtual situation. People try, but you really can't do it. So I think the blended approach is good. And I think more and more we're going to see digital approaches, which should help reduce costs and should help reach greater audiences. But we lose certain elements by doing everything online.
Yeah. Another, maybe we'll take last question. There are some more questions, but you will take this one. Maybe Dr. Selvaraju is next 4:15. You need to start. And across many developing countries, we are seeing the resources for public extension continuously it is declining. And how you see future of the public extension and where to get the resources to run the public extension organizations?
Yeah, declining resources is a big issue for everyone, governments in particular. I think, you know, the answer there is in part to be bold and innovative and think about, you know, new financing mechanisms. I think GFROS also has a global good practice note on financing models, you know, including things like levies and taxes and so forth at the local level. But I think another key thing for governments and for extension systems to lobby their governments is to really partner with the farmers. The farmers need our extension services, right? The farmers want better livelihoods. And, you know, that's your tax base as well. And so we need to make those linkages and lobby and advocate with our partners who have the same interests. So I think we really need to work more with farmer organizations and lobby groups for different industries, you know, different crop industries and so forth to lobby governments to put more funding, because, you know, funding is limited, but they're putting the funding somewhere.
Yeah. Thank you for candid answer, Kristin, and thank you very much for all wonderful presentation and taking a lot of questions.